The shelter called at 3 p.m. to say Tim had 24 hours left, but the stranger who saved him at midnight didn't even like dogs. I had one suitcase half packed and a carry-on I kept rearranging because I couldn't figure out what mattered enough to take. That's when my phone lit up with the shelter's number. Tim Walker, 12 years old, scheduled, 24 hours. The coordinator's voice had that practiced gentleness volunteers develop when they've made too many of these calls. He's not aggressive, Ellis. He just doesn't engage. People walk past his kennel. He doesn't even look up anymore. I pulled up Tim's file photo while she was still talking. A brown and white mixed breed with eyes that didn't plead or perform. They just existed. Quiet, steady, waiting for absolutely nothing. My chest tightened in that specific way it does when you're already empty, but life asks for one more piece of you anyway. I wasn't supposed to care this much. I was supposed to be on a plane in 14 hours, leaving behind a city that had taken everything it wanted and given back only the kind of silence that makes you forget how to sleep. But here was Tim, another ending I couldn't stop, another goodbye I didn't have the capacity for. I screenshotted his photo, posted it to every rescue group I knew. Then, and I still don't know why, I printed it at the FedEx down the street and slid it into the front pocket of my carry-on. Not because I thought it would work, because the alternative was boarding that flight knowing I'd left one more soul waiting in the dark, and I'd already abandoned enough. What I didn't know then, Tim wasn't waiting to be saved. He'd already done the saving. If you believe animals remember, if you believe quiet loyalty can change lives, hit that subscribe button right now and tell us where you're watching from, because this story isn't about saving a dog, it's about recognizing one. The airport the next morning felt like every airport, fluorescent brightness trying to hide how disorienting displacement actually is. I kept checking my phone for updates that never came. Tim's photo was still in my bag, a folded piece of paper I'd touched at least 6 times at TSA, at the coffee stand, at the gate. Then a stranger saw it, and everything I thought I understood about loyalty, about being overlooked, about timing, it all unraveled in the middle of Gate 47. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Tim Walker wasn't my dog. He wasn't anybody's dog. That was the problem. The shelter had pulled him from a hoarding situation 8 months earlier, one of 17 animals living in a garage with no windows and food bowls that hadn't been washed in what the report called an indeterminate period of time. The other 16 dogs got adopted within weeks. They were young or small or had that heartbreaking tilt to their heads that makes people pull out their phones and start the paperwork before they've even met the animal. Tim just stood there, in the back of the kennel, not aggressive, not friendly, just present. Like he'd learned a long time ago that hoping for anything only made it hurt worse when it didn't come. The volunteers loved him in that quiet, aching way you love things you know you can't fix. They'd take him out to the yard. He'd walk the perimeter once, sniff the fence line, then sit and wait to go back inside. No interest in toys, no interest in treats, no interest in performing the kind of joy that gets you noticed. Unadoptable, the file said. Not because he bit, not because he destroyed things, because in a system built on charisma and first impressions, Tim had none. He was a dog who'd given up on being seen, and that made him invisible. I'd been volunteering at the shelter for 6 months, ever since I needed somewhere to go that wasn't my apartment, which had started to feel less like a home and more like a waiting room for a life I couldn't figure out how to start. Walking dogs gave me a reason to leave the house, gave me something to care about that didn't require me to explain why I'd stopped caring about everything else. Tim was always my last walk of the day, because he didn't demand anything, didn't need me to be cheerful or present or okay. He just walked beside me, and we both pretended the silence was comfortable instead of sad. I knew his time was running out. The shelter was overcrowded. The county had quotas. And Tim, sweet and broken and entirely unremarkable, was exactly the kind of dog who disappeared from the system without anyone noticing. So when the coordinator called that Tuesday afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. Tired of losing, tired of trying, tired of being the person who showed up to say goodbye because no one else would. "We're putting him down tomorrow at 3 p.m., she said. "I wanted you to know, in case you wanted to be there." I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be anywhere. But I also couldn't imagine Tim spending his last hours alone in a kennel, waiting for nothing, the way he'd waited for everything. "I'll come," I said. And then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Is there any chance?"
"Ellis," her voice was kind, too kind. "We've tried. He's been on the website. We've done adoption events. He doesn't show well, and we're out of space." Out of space, out of time, out of options. The math of triage in a world that produces more need than it can hold. I hung up and stared at my suitcase. In that life, I was trying to fold small enough to carry. At the plane ticket on my phone screen for a one-way flight to somewhere I'd never been, where no one knew me, where I could start over as someone who hadn't failed at everything that mattered. And then I looked at Tim's photo. That face, those eyes that didn't ask for anything, because asking had never worked. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I believed in some version of fate where posting a photo to Facebook could undo the cruelty of logistics. Maybe I just needed to feel like I'd tried, so leaving wouldn't feel like one more thing I'd walked away from. I posted his photo everywhere. Rescue groups, lost pet pages, community boards. I wrote, "This is Tim Walker, 12 years old, 24 hours left. Doesn't bark, doesn't beg, just waits. If you've ever been overlooked, you'll understand him. If you've ever needed someone to just stay, he's your dog." Then I printed his photo at the FedEx on Coleman Street. The guy behind the counter asked if it was my dog. I said no. He asked why I was printing it then. I didn't have an answer that made sense, so I just paid and left. I folded the photo and put it in the front pocket of my carry-on, right next to my boarding pass. 2 pieces of paper, 2 ways of leaving. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there doing the math. 14 hours until my flight. 24 hours until Tim. If no one came forward, I'd go to the shelter in the morning, sit with him one last time, and then board a plane to a life where I wouldn't have to keep saying goodbye. It felt like the only plan I had left. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Tim's photo was already moving through the world in ways I'd never see, shared by people I'd never meet, seen by someone who'd spent years trying to forget a face that looked exactly like his. And in less than 12 hours, that person would be standing 3 feet away from me at an airport gate, staring at a folded piece of paper, and asking a question that would crack open a story I didn't even know existed. But right then, at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, all I knew was that I'd done what I could, and it probably wouldn't be enough. It never was. I couldn't stop thinking about that word, unadoptable. It sat in my chest like a stone while I reread Tim's file in midnight, the blue light from my laptop making my apartment feel even emptier than it already was. I'd pulled his records from the shelter database, something volunteers weren't technically supposed to do from home, but the password was taped to the desk and nobody had bothered to change it in 2 years. Intake notes from 8 months ago, animal control officer's report, behavioral assessments, volunteer observations logged week after week in that clinical shorthand that made living creatures sound like inventory. Subject does not engage with stimuli, no food motivation, no toy drive, remains in back of kennel during visiting hours, exhibits shutdown behavior when approached by unfamiliar individuals. I scrolled down, kept reading. Day 14, walked without incident, no reactivity to other dogs, returned to kennel without resistance. Day 28, allowed full physical exam, no aggression, appears depressed but stable. Day 56, adopted by family with children, returned same day, reason given, too quiet, kids were scared of him. My jaw clenched. Too quiet, as if silence was a character flaw instead of a survival strategy. I kept scrolling, month after month of the same notes. Walked fine, ate fine, no incidents, no bites, no lunges, no resource guarding, no separation anxiety, no destruction. The only thing Tim had ever done wrong was failed to perform happiness for strangers.
There was a comment thread at the bottom of his file where volunteers had logged their observations. I recognized most of the names. People I'd worked shifts with. People who loved these animals enough to show up in the heat and the cold and the heartbreak. Marissa, week 12. He's the easiest dog I've ever walked. I keep waiting for the behavioral issues to show up. They never do. He just exists. It's like he's given up on being noticed. James, week 18. Took him to an adoption event at PetSmart. He sat perfectly still for 2 hours while every other dog got attention. One little girl asked why he looked sad. Her mom pulled her away. I wanted to scream. Darren, week 23. I don't understand why he's still here. He's house-trained, he's gentle, he doesn't pull on the leash. He's literally everything people say they want in a dog, except he won't wag his tail on command. Since when is that a crime? I closed my laptop, pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw spots. Tim wasn't unadoptable, he was uncomfortable. And in a world that mistakes discomfort for danger, that was enough to seal his fate. I thought about the times in my own life when silence had been mistaken for something it wasn't. After my mom died, people asked how I was doing, and I didn't have the energy to perform grief in a way that made them comfortable. When I'd sit at work meetings and not contribute because I had nothing to add, and someone would inevitably pull me aside later to ask if I was okay, as if quietness was a symptom that needed diagnosing. When I'd stopped posting on social media because I didn't have anything worth sharing, and friends started checking in with concern, as if my absence from their feeds meant I was disappearing from the world. We punish people for not performing, for not being loud enough, visible enough, enthusiastic enough, and apparently we do the same thing to dogs. I opened my phone. Tim's photo had been shared 43 times. The comments were starting to come in. Poor baby, I wish I could, but we already have 3 dogs. Have you tried posting in the senior dog group? He looks so sad. Someone please save him. Someone please save him. As if salvation was something that could be crowdsourced. As if caring from a distance counted as anything other than spectating. One comment stood out. No profile picture, just a name. Morgan L. Does he have a scar on his left shoulder, like an old puncture wound? I stared at the screen, pulled up Tim's medical records, scrolled to the physical exam notes from intake. Healed puncture scar, left shoulder, approximately 2 to 3 years old, consistent with bite wound or sharp object, no current infection. My heart started beating faster. I clicked on Morgan L's profile. Private, no mutual friends, location listed as traveling. I typed a response. Yes, he does. Do you know him? The 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, then nothing. I waited 5 minutes, 10, refreshed the page 6 times. No response. I set my phone down, picked it up again, stared at that comment until the words stopped making sense. Outside, a car alarm went off, someone shouted, the sound of the city doing what it always did, moving forward, indifferent to the small devastations happening in apartments and shelters and lives that didn't make enough noise to matter. I looked at my suitcase, at my boarding pass, at the clock that said I had 12 hours before I left, and Tim had 22 hours before everything ended. And I couldn't stop thinking about that comment, that question, that stranger who'd noticed a detail no one else had thought to ask about. If Tim had a scar from years ago, that meant he had a life before the hoarding house, before the shelter, before unadoptable became the only word anyone used to describe him. That meant someone, somewhere, had known him when he was different, or maybe when the world was different to him. And if that was true, if there was a story no one had bothered to ask about, then maybe the label everyone had accepted wasn't the truth at all. Maybe it was just the easiest explanation, the one that let people move on without feeling guilty. I screenshotted Morgan L's comment, sent it to the shelter coordinator with a message, "Someone might recognize Tim, asking about an old scar. Can you hold off until I land tomorrow, just in case?" She didn't respond. It was past midnight. She was probably asleep, the way people with normal lives sleep when they're not haunted by dogs they failed to save. I lay back on my bed,
fully clothed, phone in my hand, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many times Tim had done the same thing in his kennel, waiting for nothing, hoping for less, shutting down because staying open meant more disappointment. And somewhere out there, someone named Morgan L. had seen his photo and asked about a scar, which meant Tim's story was bigger than the four walls of a kennel and the cold math of euthanasia schedules. The question was whether anyone would care enough to find out what it was before it was too late. The airport was exactly as soulless as I remembered. I arrived at 6:47 a.m., 3 hours before my flight, because I couldn't sit in my apartment anymore with the silence and the guilt and the refresh button on a comment that never got a response. The rideshare driver had tried to make conversation, asked where I was headed. I said I didn't know yet. He stopped asking after that. The terminal smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. 2 bright fluorescent lights made everyone look exhausted or dead. I stood in the security line with my carry-on and my suitcase and Tim's photo folded in the front pocket, and I felt the weight of all of it like I was carrying more than just luggage. Somewhere across the city, Tim was waking up in his kennel, and if you could call it waking up. Maybe he never really slept. Maybe he just existed in that in-between state where hope had died but the body kept going anyway. 18 hours left. The line moved forward. I shuffled with it. A kid in front of me dropped his tablet and started crying. His mother picked it up, checked for cracks, handed it back without looking at him. We all kept moving. I pulled out my phone, checked Tim's post again. 62 shares now. More comments. More people saying they wish they could help but couldn't. More digital empathy that wouldn't change a single material thing. Still nothing from Morgan L. I opened the camera, pulled up Tim's photo from my gallery, and posted it one more time. Different caption this time. This is Tim Walker. In 18 hours he'll be gone. Not because he's dangerous, not because he's sick, because he's quiet, because he doesn't perform joy for strangers, because the system ran out of space and he ran out of time. If you've ever felt invisible, you understand him. If you've ever needed proof that silence isn't surrender, he's it. Someone out there knows his story. Someone remembers. If that's you, please, there's still time. I hit post, watched the little circle spin, felt the hollow victory of doing something that probably wouldn't matter. Next! I stepped forward, placed my carry-on the belt, took off my shoes, went through the scanner with my arms up like I was surrendering, which maybe I was. On the other side, I repacked, shoes back on, boarding pass in hand. The photo of Tim was still in the front pocket. I could feel it there, a small square of paper that weighed more than it should. The departure board said my gate was B17. I started walking, past Hudson News selling books no one would finish, past Starbucks with a line 20 people deep, past travelers in sweatpants and business suits, all of us going somewhere, none of us sure it was the right place. I found an empty seat near the window. Outside, planes taxied in slow motion. Baggage trucks beeped. Someone in an orange vest waved light sticks at something I couldn't see. Inside, a woman 2 seats down FaceTimed her daughter. A businessman typed emails with the aggression of someone who'd confused productivity with importance. An elderly couple shared a muffin, breaking it into careful halves. And I sat there, with 17 hours and 13 minutes left on Tim's clock, trying to convince myself that leaving wasn't the same as abandoning. My phone buzzed. The shelter coordinator, finally. Ellis, I got your message. I can't hold him past 3 p.m. We have a transport coming in at 4 and we're over capacity. I'm sorry. If this person reaches out, tell them to call me directly, but I need you to prepare for the reality that he's scheduled. I read it twice, felt that familiar tightness in my throat. Typed back, understood. What else was there to say? The math was the math, the logistics were the logistics. One dog's life weighed against the space needed for the next wave of abandoned animals. The cruelty wasn't personal, it was systematic, which somehow made it worse. I looked at the photo in my bag, pulled it out, unfolded it. Kim's face stared back at me, those eyes that didn't ask for anything because asking had only ever led to disappointment. A boarding announcement crackled overhead. Zone 1 for Flight 2847 to Phoenix. The family stood, gathered their things, joined the line with the resigned efficiency of people who'd done this too many times to feel anything about it.
I thought about Tim in his kennel right now. Thought about whether anyone had walked him this morning or if they'd already started treating him like he was gone. Thought about how many times he'd watched people walk past, how many times he'd heard voices that didn't include his name, how many times he'd waited for a door to open that never did. And I thought about the fact that in less than 12 hours, I'd be in a different time zone, in a city where no one knew me, starting a life that had nothing to do with shelters or euthanasia lists or dogs who'd committed the crime of being quiet. I could already feel the relief of that distance, and I hated myself for it. My phone buzzed again. Not the coordinator this time. A notification from the post I'd just made. Someone had commented. I opened it. Morgan L. I'm at the airport. Where are you? My heart stopped, then started again too fast. I typed back with shaking hands. Which airport? The 3 dots appeared immediately. Yours. I saw your earlier post. You mentioned leaving on a flight. I took a chance. I'm at Terminal B. I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee, looked around like I'd be able to spot a stranger in the crowd based on nothing but a name with no profile picture. Typed, B-17, I'm here now. On my way. I stared at my phone, at the impossible timing, at the fact that someone who'd asked about a scar had somehow found their way to the same airport, the same terminal, the same moment. People moved around me. Announcements echoed. The world kept spinning in its indifferent way. And somewhere in the crowd, someone who knew Tim's story, someone who'd recognized the detail no one else had noticed, was walking toward me. I didn't know what they wanted, didn't know what they'd say, didn't know if it would change anything, or if this was just another version of caring from a distance. But for the first time since the shelter called at 3 p.m. yesterday, I felt something other than resignation. I felt like maybe the story wasn't over yet. If you've ever walked away from something unfinished and felt it follow you, subscribe now, because what's about to happen proves that timing is never accidental. I saw them before they saw me. Mid-30s maybe, dark jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder. They were moving through the gate area with the kind of purpose people have when they're trying not to think too hard about where they're going. Then they stopped, just stopped mid-stride, like they'd hit an invisible wall. Their eyes were locked on something. I followed their gaze and realized they were staring at the phone of a woman sitting 3 seats away from me, a volunteer from another shelter I recognized from coordination emails. She was scrolling through her feed, probably seeing the same posts I've been sharing for the past 16 hours. Tim's photo was on her screen. The stranger's face had gone completely still, not blank, still. Like every muscle had frozen while their brain tried to process something it didn't want to recognize. They took a step closer, then stopped again. Their hand came up halfway, like they were going to say something, then dropped. I stood up, didn't think about it, just moved. Are you Morgan? They turned, looked at me like I'd appeared out of thin air. Their eyes were dark, unsettled, the kind of eyes that had seen something they couldn't unsee. Eurelis, not a question, a statement. You asked about a scar. They nodded, slow, deliberate, still staring at me like they were trying to figure out if I was real. Can I... They gestured vaguely toward the volunteer's phone. Can I see that photo again? I pulled out my phone. I opened Tim's picture, hold it out. Morgan took it. Their hands weren't shaking, but their grip was too tight. They zoomed in on Tim's face, then his shoulder, then back to his eyes. I don't like dogs, they said quietly. I blinked. What? I don't like dogs. They said it again, firmer this time, like they were trying to convince themselves. I never have. I don't trust them. I don't... They stopped, swallowed hard. I don't go near them. Then why are you here? They didn't answer right away, just kept staring at Tim's photo with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite recognition, not quite disbelief, something rawer than both. The scar, left shoulder, puncture wound. You mentioned that in the comment. I know, because I'm the one who gave it to him. The air left my lungs. Morgan looked up at me. Their eyes were wet, but no tears had fallen yet. 17 hours, they said quietly. That's how much time he has left.
Morgan's head snapped up. What? He's scheduled for euthanasia at 3 p.m. today. The shelter's overcrowded. He's been there 8 months. No one wants him because he's quiet, because he shuts down. Yeah. Morgan stood up, fast, decisive, the grief in their eyes hardening into something sharper. Where is he?
Route 34, Morgan said, about 40 miles outside Colorado Springs. County road, no lights, no houses for miles. We were walking now, fast, through the terminal toward the exit. I didn't know where we were going yet, just knew we were going. Morgan kept talking, the words coming out like they'd been held underwater for too long. It was raining, not hard, just enough to make the road slick. I remember the wipers, the rhythm, back and forth, and then nothing, just impact and spinning and the sound of metal folding in on itself like paper. We passed the coffee stand, the bookstore, the family still waiting to board for Phoenix. When it stopped, I was upside down. No, sideways. I don't know. Everything was wrong. The seatbelt was cutting into my shoulder. There was glass everywhere, and this smell, gasoline, burning rubber, copper. Morgan's pace quickened. I matched it. I tried to move, couldn't. Tried to reach my phone, couldn't. I could hear the engine ticking, could feel something wet running down my temple, and I knew, this is it. This is how it ends. Alone on a road no one uses, in the dark, bleeding out while the car leaked everything it had left. We reached the escalator down to ground transportation. Morgan didn't stop talking. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, something else. Outside the car. And I thought, animal. Coyote maybe. Coming for the easy meal. I tried to make noise, tried to scare it off, but I couldn't get enough air to yell. The automatic doors slid open. Cold morning air hit us. Morgan pulled their jacket tighter. He came to the window, stayed low, cautious, and I could see him in the dashboard light. Brown and white, thin, shaking, ears back. He looked as scared as I felt. A taxi honked. Someone wheeled luggage past us too fast. The city waking up around a story that had happened years ago in the middle of nowhere. I tried to call him closer, use the voice you use with dogs, soft, gentle, like I knew what I was doing. But he wouldn't come, just stood there, watching. And I got angry, because I was dying, and he was my only chance, and he wouldn't help, and Morgan stopped walking, stopped talking, stood on the curb with their hands balled into fists. I don't even remember grabbing the metal, piece of the dash that had broken off, sharp edge, and when he finally got close enough, when he finally trusted me enough to come within reach, I stabbed him. Their voice dropped to almost nothing. I felt it go in, felt him jerk back, heard him cry out, and I thought, good, run, go find someone, bring help. But he didn't run. Morgan looked at me with eyes that had been living with this for years. He stumbled, bled, whimpered, and then he laid down, right there in the wet grass, close enough that I could hear him breathing, and he just stayed. Even after I'd hurt him, even after I'd given him every reason to leave, he stayed. A bus pulled up. Passengers got off. The world continued its indifferent forward motion. 4 hours, Morgan said. That's how long it took for someone to drive past. 4 hours of him lying there, me lying here, both of us bleeding, both of us waiting, and the whole time I kept thinking, why? Why won't he leave? Why won't he save himself? Because that's not who he is, I said quietly. Morgan nodded. I know that now, but then I just thought he was stupid, broken, too scared to run. I didn't understand that staying was the choice, that he'd decided I was worth the wait. A notification buzzed on my phone. I ignored it. When the paramedics came, they had to move him to get to me. He didn't want to go, kept trying to get back. They said he was injured, needed a vet. I told him to take him, save him. I'd pay for everything. Just don't let him die because of me. Morgan's jaw clenched. But by the time they got me stabilized and loaded, he was gone. No one knew where. Animal control said they'd look. Shelters said they'd call if a dog matching that description came in. Nothing. For 6 years, nothing. We stood there on the curb while cars came and went and people found their rides and left for places that made sense. I stopped looking after a year, Morgan admitted. Convinced myself he didn't make it, that the wound got infected, that he died alone somewhere in those woods because They couldn't finish. I pulled up Tim's photo again, zoomed in on his shoulder, on the scar that had healed years ago but never really disappeared. Morgan stared at it. His eyes, Morgan said suddenly, in the photo, like he's not expecting anything, like he's already accepted that hoping doesn't work. He learned that in a hoarding house, I said quietly. 17 dogs in a garage with no windows. By the time animal control found them, he'd already shut down. No, Morgan's voice was certain. He learned it before that. He learned it on Route 34, when the one person he chose to save chose to hurt him instead. The words landed like a diagnosis. Final, irreversible. He's been waiting for 6 years, Morgan continued. Not for me, for proof that staying was worth it, that trust doesn't always end in betrayal. And no one, their voice cracked, no one ever gave him that proof. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. The shelter coordinator. Ellis, we need the kennel by 2 p.m. If someone is coming, they need to be here by then. Otherwise, we proceed as scheduled. I showed Morgan the message. She read it, looked at her watch, looked at me. How far is the shelter? 40 minutes, maybe less if traffic's good. Morgan pulled out her phone, started typing something, stopped, started again. I don't know if he'll remember me, she said quietly. I don't know if seeing me will help or hurt. I don't know if I have any right to show up after what I did. You're the only person who knows his story, the real one, not the file, not the label, the moment that changed him. Morgan looked at Tim's photo one more time, at the quiet, steady dog who'd been called unadoptable because he'd learned the hard way that loving people could cost you everything. Then we need to go, Morgan said. Now. And for the first time since the shelter called at 3 p.m. yesterday, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a story with an ending that didn't involve loss. But first, we had to get there in time.
Give me the shelter's number. Morgan said it like a command. Not harsh, just certain. The voice of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to unmake it. I pulled up the contact, hesitated for half a second, some instinct to maintain control, to be the one who fixed things, to prove I hadn't failed completely. Then I handed over my phone. Morgan took it, dialed, put it on speaker. 2 rings. 3. Riverside Animal Shelter, this is Jennifer. Hi. Morgan's voice was steadier than I expected. My name is Morgan Lett. I'm calling about a dog you have scheduled for euthanasia today, Tim Walker. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Yes, Tim. He's scheduled for 3 p.m. Are you interested in adopting? Morgan glanced at me. Something passed across their face. Fear, maybe. Or responsibility finally catching up after 6 years of running from it. I am, but I need you to understand something first. They took a breath. I know this dog, from before, years ago, and I need to know, is there a scar on his left shoulder? Old puncture wound? More typing. Longer pause. Yes, it's in his medical records. Healed injury. We estimated it happened 2 to 3 years before his intake. Morgan closed his eyes. When they opened them again, they were wet. That was me. I gave him that scar. There was an accident. He stayed with me when he should have run, and I hurt him because I was scared and stupid and... Their voice cracked. And he saved my life anyway. The line went quiet. I could hear Jennifer breathing on the other end. Could hear the shelter sounds in the background, barking, phones ringing, the controlled chaos of a system barely holding together. How soon can you be here? Jennifer's voice had changed. Softer. No longer transactional. 40 minutes? Maybe less. I'll put a hold on him, personal interest, but you need to be here by 2 p.m. at the latest. We have a transport coming and I can't... I'll be there, Morgan said. I promise.
I'll be there." They hung up, handed me back my phone, then just stood there on the airport curb looking like someone who'd been holding their breath for 6 years and finally remembered how to exhale. "Thank you," they said quietly. I shook my head. "I didn't do anything." "You posted his photo. You printed it. You carried it with you. Morgan stopped. "You made sure he wasn't forgotten, even when you were trying to forget everything else." The words hit harder than they should have, maybe because they were true. I'd been so focused on saving Tim as some kind of redemption for all the things I couldn't save. My mom, my sense of purpose, the version of myself that used to believe trying mattered. I'd wanted to be the hero of this story so badly that I'd missed the point entirely. This wasn't about me. It had never been about me. "His waiting," I said suddenly. "Everyone thought it was a flaw. The shelter, the volunteers, the families who returned him. We all saw it as giving up, as shutdown behavior, as proof he was broken." Morgan nodded slowly, understanding where I was going. "But it wasn't giving up," I continued. "It was devotion. He learned on that road that waiting, that staying, is how you love people who can't love you back yet. And he's been doing it ever since. In the hoarding house, in the shelter, waiting for someone to recognize what he was actually doing." Morgan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "He wasn't unadoptable," they said. "He was just waiting for the right person to remember." A rideshare app was already open on Morgan's phone. They typed in the shelter's address. A car accepted. 3 minutes away. I looked at my boarding pass, at the gate number, at the life I'd been so sure I needed to escape to. "Your flight," Morgan said, noticing. "Yeah. You should go. You don't need to." "I'm coming with you." Morgan started to protest. I cut him off. "I've been trying to save Tim since yesterday, trying to be the person who fixed this. But that's not my role." I met his eyes. "My role was to make sure you two found each other again, and I'm going to see it through." The rideshare pulled up. A blue sedan with a driver who looked too tired to care where we were going or why. We got in. Morgan gave the address again, even though it was already in the app. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. I watched the airport get smaller in the side mirror, watched my escape plan disappear behind glass and distance, and a choice I hadn't known I was going to make until I made it. My phone buzzed. The coordinator, Jennifer. "Ellis, I don't know what you did, but thank you. Morgan just called. Hold is in place. Tim's safe until they arrive." I showed Morgan the message. They read it, and something in their face finally relaxed. Just a little. Just enough. "He's safe," I said. "For now." Morgan stared out the window. "But what happens when he sees me? What if he remembers? What if—" They stopped. "What if the last thing he remembers is me hurting him?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy, unanswerable. Because the truth was, we didn't know. Didn't know if Tim would recognize Morgan, and didn't know if dogs held grudges or just moved forward in that way humans never quite learned how to do. Didn't know if this reunion would be healing or just another kind of harm. We were driving toward an ending we couldn't predict, trusting that 6 years of waiting, for both of them, had led to this moment for a reason. The city blurred past. Office buildings, strip malls, neighborhoods where people were living ordinary Wednesdays with no idea that a dog they'd never meet was about to get a second chance at being seen. Morgan's leg bounced, nervous energy they couldn't contain. "What do I even say to him?" they asked quietly. "I don't think you say anything," I said quietly. "I think you just show up and let him decide if that's enough." Morgan nodded, looked down at his hands, at the scar on his own palm from the accident, from the same night that had marked them both. "What if I'm not enough?" they whispered. "You stayed," I said. "After everything, after 6 years of thinking he was gone, you saw his photo and you came. That's what he does. That's what he's always done. Maybe," I hesitated, "maybe you're more alike than you think." The driver took an exit. We were getting close now. 15 minutes, maybe less. Morgan pulled up Tim's photo one more time, stared at those quiet eyes that had learned not to hope. "I'm going to adopt him,"
They said not a question, a vow. Whatever it takes, whatever he needs, I'm not leaving without him. I know. And if he doesn't remember me, if he can't forgive me, I'll spend the rest of his life proving I'm worth a second chance. The shelter came into view. A single-story building, chain-link fence, parking lot half full of cars that'd seen better days. We pulled in. The driver stopped. Morgan didn't move. "You ready?" I asked. "No." Morgan opened the door anyway. "But he waited 6 years. I think I owe him the courage to walk through a door." If you believe the smallest moments can rewrite entire lives, subscribe now, because the most powerful part of this story hasn't happened yet.
Jennifer met us at the front desk, mid-50s, kind eyes, the kind of tired that comes from loving too many animals you can't save. "You're Morgan," she said. Not a question. "I am." "Tim's in kennel 12, back row." She paused, looked at Morgan with something that wasn't quite pity but wasn't quite hope either. "I need to warn you, he doesn't react well to new people. He'll probably retreat to the back corner. Don't take it personally." "He knows me," Morgan said quietly. "Or he did, 6 years ago." Jennifer nodded slowly, like she'd heard stranger things, like in this job nothing surprised her anymore. "Take your time," she said. "I'll start the paperwork." We walked through the doors into the kennel area. The smell hit first, disinfectant trying to cover the reality of too many animals in too little space. The sound came next, barking, whining, the percussion of hope and despair echoing off concrete walls. Morgan stopped walking halfway down the row. "I can't do this," they whispered. "Yes, you can. What if seeing me makes it worse? What if I'm just another person who hurt him?" I turned to face them. "Then you'll spend however long it takes proving you're not, but you have to walk through that door first." Morgan took a breath, another, then moved forward. Kennel 12 was at the end, a handwritten sign, Tim Walker, hold, personal interest. And there, in the back corner, exactly where Jennifer said he'd be, was Tim. He didn't look up when we approached, didn't acknowledge us at all. Just sat there with his back against the wall, eyes fixed on nothing, waiting for absolutely nothing. Morgan's hand came up to the chain link, trembling. "Tim," they said softly. Nothing, not even a flicker. "It's okay," I said. "Just tell him what happened. Tell him the truth." Morgan nodded, crouched down to be at eye level with a dog who still wasn't looking. 6 years ago, Morgan started, their voice barely above a whisper, I was driving home from a job I hated in a city I didn't want to live in anymore. It was late, raining, and I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. A dog 3 kennels down barked. Tim's ear twitched, nothing else. Something came out of nowhere, deer, tree, I still don't know, but the car spun, flipped, ended up on its side in a ditch on a road that nobody uses, and I was trapped. Seatbelt wouldn't release, the door was crushed, phone was somewhere I couldn't reach. Morgan's voice started to shake. I was bleeding, a lot, head wound, couldn't tell how bad, and I could smell gasoline, could hear something dripping, and I knew I was going to die there, alone, in the dark, on a road where nobody would find me until it was too late. Tim shifted slightly, still not looking, but listening now, I could tell. Then you showed up, Morgan continued, out of the woods like you'd been waiting, like you knew someone needed you. You were skinny, scared, shaking, but you came anyway. Morgan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I tried to call you over, used every gentle voice I could manage, but you wouldn't come close. You'd just stand there at the window, watching me. And I got frustrated because I was dying and you were my only chance and you wouldn't help. And their voice broke completely. I grabbed a piece of metal from the dash, sharp, jagged, and when you finally trusted me enough to come within reach, when you finally believed I wouldn't hurt you, I stabbed you in the shoulder, because I thought if I hurt you, you'd run, and if you ran, maybe someone would see you. Maybe someone would follow you back. Maybe... Morgan couldn't continue for a moment.
just knelt there with tears running down her face. "But you didn't run," they finally said. "You stumbled back, you bled, you cried out, and then you lay down, right there in the grass, close enough that I could hear you breathing, and you stayed." Tim's head turned just slightly, still not looking at Morgan, but awareness now, recognition of something. "For 4 hours," Morgan whispered, "you stayed, while we both bled, while my breathing kept spiking and my panic kept stopping, and I kept thinking, this is it, this is the end. And every time, every single time, I'd hear you, breathing, steady, calm, like you were showing me how." Morgan's hand pressed flat against the chain link. "You regulated my breath," they said, understanding fully for the first time. "Your presence, your stillness, it kept me grounded when everything else was chaos. You weren't waiting for help, you were being the help, just by staying, just by existing in that quiet, steady way that everyone mistakes for giving up." A tear fell off Morgan's jaw and hit the concrete. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I couldn't find you. I'm sorry it took 6 years and a random post and impossible timing for us to find each other again. But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, if you can forgive me, I'm not leaving without you, not this time." Tim sat, right there at the front of the kennel, close enough that if there wasn't chain link between them, Morgan could have touched him. He didn't wag his tail, didn't make a sound, just sat and waited. The same way he'd waited in the grass that night. The same way he'd waited in the hoarding house. The same way he'd waited in this shelter for 8 months while people walked past calling him unadoptable. Because Tim didn't wait out of hopelessness. He waited because leaving wasn't in his nature. Because staying, even when it hurt, even when it made no sense, even when no one understood, is how he loved. My phone buzzed. I checked it out of habit. 3:17 p.m. The 24-hour deadline had passed. Tim was supposed to be gone by now, supposed to be another dog who disappeared from the system without fanfare, another quiet ending that no one would remember. But he wasn't gone. He was sitting at the front of his kennel, looking at the person whose life he'd saved 6 years ago, waiting to see if this time, finally, someone would stay for him. Jennifer appeared behind us with a clipboard and a leash. "Paperwork's ready, whenever you are." Morgan stood, looked at me with eyes that were asking permission they didn't need. "Go," I said. "He's been waiting long enough." Jennifer opened the kennel door. Tim didn't move, just watched as Morgan stepped in, as they knelt down at his level, as they reached out a hand, slowly, carefully, asking rather than taking. And then, for the first time in 6 years, Tim leaned forward, just slightly, just enough, and let the person he saved touch the scar they'd given him.
I stepped back from the kennel, gave them a space they didn't ask for but needed anyway. Jennifer caught my eye, gestured toward the front office with a tilt of her head that said, "Let them have this moment." I followed her out, leaving Morgan and Tim to their reunion that was 6 years overdue and impossibly, perfectly on time. The lobby was quieter than the kennel area, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of phones ringing in back offices. Jennifer sat down behind the desk, pulled up Morgan's file on the computer, and started typing. "You did good," she said without looking up. I leaned against the wall, felt the exhaustion hit all at once now that the adrenaline was draining. I didn't do anything. Morgan found the post. Morgan made the connection. Morgan showed up. "You carried his photo to an airport." Jennifer looked at me now. Really looked. "You could have just posted and moved on. Could have boarded that flight and convinced yourself you'd tried. But you didn't. You made him visible. And sometimes that's the only thing that matters." My throat tightened. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. She went back to typing. "The adoption will take about 40 minutes to process. You're welcome to wait, or..." She paused. "Or you can go catch your flight. It's up to you." I checked my phone. 3:34 p.m. My flight had been scheduled for 9:47 a.m. I'd missed it by 6 hours. The next one wasn't until tomorrow morning. "I'll wait," I said. Jennifer smiled. Small, knowing. "Thought you might."
I sat down in one of those plastic chairs that every shelter and DMV and hospital waiting room has, uncomfortable by design, like they don't want you to settle, like everything is temporary and you shouldn't get used to it. Through the window, I could see the parking lot. The ride share that had brought us was long gone. My suitcase was still in the trunk of a car at the airport. My carry-on was probably lost and found by now. My entire plan to start over somewhere else had dissolved in the space between a shelter call and a stranger's memory. And I felt okay about it. Not relieved, not victorious, just okay. Like I'd been holding my breath for so long I'd forgotten what normal breathing felt like, and now my lungs were remembering. My phone buzzed. A notification from the airline. Flight rescheduling options available. I swiped it away. Another buzz. A text from the person subletting my apartment, asking when I'd be back to pick up the last of my things. I'd told her I wasn't coming back, that she could have whatever I'd left behind. I typed, "Change of plans. I'll be there this week." Sent it before I could overthink. The door to the kennel area opened. Morgan stepped through, Tim walking calmly beside them on a leash. No pulling, no excitement, just that same quiet presence he'd carried through everything. Morgan's eyes were red but clear, the kind of clear that comes after crying out something you've been carrying too long. "He remembered," they said softly. "I don't know how, but he did." Jennifer came around the desk with paperwork. "I'll need your signature here, here, and here. Adoption fee is waived for senior dogs. You'll need to schedule a vet appointment within 2 weeks. We recommend—" She kept talking. Morgan kept signing. Tim sat at Morgan's feet like he'd always been there, like the 6 years in between had just been a long walk they'd taken separately, but always knew they'd finish together. I watched them. Watched the way Morgan's hand kept dropping to Tim's head, gentle, reverent, like touching proof of something they'd thought they'd lost forever. And I understood something I'd been too close to see before. This wasn't about me saving Tim. It was never about me saving anyone. It was about learning that love doesn't always look like holding on. Sometimes it looks like making space, like carrying a photo you don't know why you're carrying until someone else needs to see it, like stepping back when the reunion isn't yours to have, like accepting that your role in someone's story might just be the bridge between where they were and where they needed to be. Jennifer finished the paperwork, handed Morgan a folder thick with vet records and care instructions and a certificate that said Tim Walker now belongs to someone who'd never stopped looking for him. "Take care of him," Jennifer said, and I could hear all the time she'd said those words knowing the dog wouldn't be cared for, knowing people adopted for the wrong reasons and returned when it got hard, knowing that unadoptable was sometimes just code for requires more than we're willing to give. But this time felt different. "I will," Morgan promised, "every day for however long he has left." They looked at me. "Thank you, Alice, for everything." I shook my head. "You would have found him eventually. The universe has a way of bringing people back to the things they're supposed to find." "Maybe," Morgan's voice was soft, "but you made sure he was still here when I did. That's not nothing." Tim looked at me too. Those quiet, steady eyes that had learned not to hope, but had stayed hopeful anyway. That had waded through darkness and pain and years of being invisible because leaving wasn't in his nature. I crouched down, met him at eye level one last time. "You're going home, finally, with someone who understands what you've been doing all this time." I touched the top of his head, felt the warmth, the realness. "Thank you for teaching me that staying matters, even when it doesn't look like it's working." Tim's tail moved, once, twice. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. Morgan and Tim walked toward the exit. I stayed where I was, watched them go, watched the door close, watched the shape of them disappear into the parking lot and into whatever life was waiting on the other side of all this. Jennifer sat back down at her desk, started typing again, the rhythm of her work continuing because there were always more animals, always more calls, always more impossible decisions. "What about you?" she asked without looking up. I thought about my suitcase at the airport, my apartment I'd already abandoned, the plane ticket to somewhere I'd never been where I could be someone I wasn't. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, not knowing felt less like failure and more like possibility. Because maybe the point wasn't having a plan. Maybe it was showing up anyway. Being present for the moments that matter, even when you don't know they matter yet. Carrying someone's photo because it feels right, even when it doesn't make sense. Maybe it was learning that loving something doesn't mean controlling the outcome. It means trusting that your small part in the story was exactly what it needed to be. I pulled up the airline app, changed my flight, not to somewhere else, back home, to the city I'd been so desperate to leave, to the apartment I'd already said goodbye to the life I'd convinced myself wasn't worth staying for. Because maybe running wasn't the answer. Maybe the answer was figuring out how to stay, how to sit with discomfort without mistaking it for danger, how to be quiet without disappearing. Tim had spent 6 years teaching me that. I just hadn't been paying attention. Now I was. Outside, a car started. I looked through the window just in time to see Morgan's rideshare pull away, Tim's silhouette visible in the back window. Calm, present, finally going somewhere that felt like home. And I thought, what does it mean to love something without owning the outcome? It means knowing when your part is done, when the story you started isn't yours to finish, when stepping back is the most generous thing you can do. It means trusting that some reunions happen exactly when they're supposed to, in ways you could never orchestrate, with timing that feels like fate, but is really just paying attention. It means being okay with being the bridge instead of the destination. I stood up, walked to the door, stepped outside into air that felt different than it had 6 hours ago. Cleaner, maybe, or just less heavy. My phone buzzed one last time. A photo from Morgan, Tim sitting in their living room, on a dog bed that looked new, with a toy beside him he probably wouldn't play with, and a look on his face that wasn't quite happiness, but wasn't resignation either. It was peace. The caption read, "He's home. Thank you for making sure he was still here to come home to." I saved the photo, closed my phone, and let myself believe that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the smallest thing at exactly the right moment is enough, even if you never see how the story ends.
I saved the photo, closed my phone, and let myself believe that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the smallest thing at exactly the right moment is enough, even if you never see how the story ends. 3 weeks later, I was back at the airport. Different terminal this time, different flight, same fluorescent lights trying to hide the fact that displacement never gets easier no matter how many times you do it. But I wasn't running anymore. I was going to visit my sister, the one I've been avoiding because seeing her meant seeing all the ways I'd let grief turn me into someone I didn't recognize. The one who'd been calling every week, asking when I'd stop hiding and come home for Sunday dinner. I'd finally answered. My phone buzzed while I waited at the gate. A message from Morgan. Another photo. Tim on a hiking trail, sitting calmly while Morgan adjusted their backpack. Mountains in the background, morning light turning everything gold. The caption, Week 3. He still doesn't play fetch, still doesn't perform joy for strangers, still just exists. And it's perfect. I smiled. Typed back, "How's he sleeping?" The response came immediately. Through the night, every night, on the bed, right next to me, like he's making sure I don't disappear again. My chest tightened in that good way, the way that means something matters. "And you?" I asked. 3 dots, then, learning that staying is harder than leaving, but worth it. He's teaching me. I looked out the window at the planes taxiing, at all the people leaving and arriving and passing through, at the constant motion that felt less like progress and more like avoidance. Morgan sent one more message. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how love doesn't mean owning the outcome, about stepping back, being generous. I think Tim's been doing that his whole life, just showing up, being present, not demanding anything in return. And we all mistook it for giving up." I read it twice. Typed, "We mistake a lot of things for giving up that are actually just different ways of loving." Yeah, we do. A boarding announcement crackled overhead. My zone, my turn to move. I gathered my things, stood in line with people who probably had their own stories about dogs they'd saved or couldn't save, about the things they carried that didn't fit in overhead bins. And I thought about Tim, about how he'd spent 6 years being called unadoptable, when really he was just waiting for someone to understand what his stillness actually meant, who could see that his quietness wasn't shut down, it was devotion, that his unwillingness to perform wasn't brokenness, it was integrity. He'd stayed on that roadside when running would have saved him. He'd stayed in that hoarding house when hope had every reason to die. He'd stayed in that shelter kennel when everyone had already decided he wasn't worth the space. Because leaving wasn't in his nature. Because loyalty doesn't always look loud. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to abandon what matters, even when no one's watching, even when it doesn't change anything, even when the world has already moved on. Tim had been teaching that lesson to anyone who'd listen. Most people just weren't quiet enough to hear it. I boarded the plane, found my seat, watched the safety demonstration I'd seen 100 times and never really paid attention to. The woman next to me had a service dog, golden retriever, well-trained, calm, the kind of dog that makes people smile and say, "Good boy," without being asked. And I thought about how different that was from Tim. How society celebrates the dogs that perform their usefulness, that prove their worth through visible action, through rescue certifications and viral videos and heartwarming stories that fit neatly into 3-minute segments. But what about the dogs like Tim? The ones whose value lives in presence rather than performance, whose love is quiet and steady and impossible to monetize. What about the people like that? The plane took off. The city got smaller beneath us, and I thought about all the things I've been running from that were really just asking me to stay long enough to understand them. My grief, my failures, my own version of unadoptable that I'd internalized because I'd stopped performing happiness convincingly enough to make other people comfortable. Tim had spent 8 months in a shelter being overlooked. I'd spent 2 years in my own life doing the same thing. Maybe we'd both just been waiting for someone to notice that stillness isn't the same as surrender, that quiet isn't the same as gone, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just keep showing up, even when showing up looks like nothing at all. My phone buzzed one last time before the flight attendant asked us to switch to airplane mode. Morgan again. A video this time. I put in my earbuds, pressed play. Tim in Morgan's living room, lying on his dog bed in a patch of afternoon sunlight. Not doing anything, not performing or entertaining or proving his worth. Just existing, just being. Morgan's voice came through the speaker, soft, almost reverent. "I used to think I saved you that night on the road, but you saved me. Not by running for help, not by doing anything dramatic or visible or worthy of a headline. You saved me by staying, by showing me what it looks like to be present when everything else is chaos, to be steady when the world is spinning, to just be there, even when being there costs you everything." The camera zoomed in slightly on Tim's face, on those quiet eyes that had learned not to hope but had never learned how to leave. Morgan continued, "I spent 6 years thinking I owed you an apology, and I do, but I also owe you a thank you for teaching me that the most important things don't announce themselves, that love doesn't always look the way we expect, that sometimes the dog nobody wants is the one everyone needs." The video ended with Tim opening his eyes, looking directly at the camera, his tail moving once, twice. Not excitement, just acknowledgement. "I'm here. I've always been here. I'll keep being here." I closed my phone, leaned my head against the window, let the tears come without trying to stop them, because I understood now, finally, completely. Tim's story wasn't about being saved from euthanasia. It was about teaching anyone paying attention that value doesn't require performance, that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless, that quiet devotion, the kind that doesn't demand recognition or reward, is its own form of heroism. And maybe that's what I'd needed to learn all along, that it was okay to be the person who didn't have all the answers, who didn't perform recovery in ways that made other people comfortable, who just showed up day after day, doing the work of existing, trusting that staying was enough even when it didn't look like progress. Tim had been doing that his whole life. Now it was my turn. The plane leveled off.
the seatbelt sign dinged off. People around me pulled out laptops and books and settled into their temporary displacement. And I sat there with the certain knowledge that somewhere in a living room I'd never see, a brown and white dog was lying in sunlight. Finally home. Finally understood. Finally exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because someone rescued him, because someone remembered. Because timing isn't about being early or late, it's about showing up exactly when you're meant to, even if that's 6 years later than expected. Because love doesn't make sense from the outside, it just makes sense to the two souls doing the staying. I thought about all the shelters across the country, all the dogs labeled unadoptable because they didn't wag enthusiastically enough, or make eye contact on command, or perform the kind of joy that translates well to adoption photos. How many of them were just waiting, not giving up, just waiting for someone to understand that stillness isn't the same as surrender, that quiet isn't the same as gone, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just keep showing up, even when showing up looks like nothing at all. How many Tim Walkers are sitting in kennels right now, time remming out, while people walked past looking for something louder, flashier, more obviously valuable? And how many people are living their own versions of that, labeled as broken or difficult or too much or not enough, when really they were just loving in a language the world had forgotten how to speak? The plane stewardess came by with drinks. I ordered water, sipped it slowly, tasted nothing but thought about everything. About Morgan learning to stay after years of running. About Tim finally getting proof that his devotion had mattered. About me, somewhere in between, figuring out that stepping back wasn't abandoning, it was trusting. Trusting that some stories don't need you to write the ending, they just need you to show up for the chapter you're meant for, to carry the photo, to make the call, to be the bridge, and then to let go without disappearing. My sister had texted earlier asking what time I'd land, if I needed a ride, if I really coming or if I'd change my mind like the last 3 times. I said, I'm really coming, and I'm staying for a while, if that's okay. She'd responded with 3 heart emojis and, it's more than okay, it's overdue. Overdue, like a library book you kept meaning to return, like a conversation you kept meaning to have, like showing up for your own life after spending too long watching it from a distance. Tim had waited 8 months for someone to see him. Morgan had waited 6 years to find him again. I'd waited 2 years to stop running. All of us just waiting for proof that staying was worth it, that quiet loyalty still mattered, that being present, truly present, was enough. We'd all gotten that proof now. The rest was just showing up for it. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you that quiet loyalty still matters, hit that subscribe button and share where you're watching from. Because stories like this don't just change how we see animals, they change how we see each other.